everyone, my name is Gabby, and welcome back to another Hugtto Precure review. This time I'm reviewing episode 11. Hana is distraught at her own weakness and failure to protect Hugtto, but her mother and friends give her the courage to keep moving. A trip to Nobinobi Tower finally wakes up Hugtto, but just then Charlotte attacks, turned into an Oshimaida. Hana is able to transform again and fight the monster with the others, with Hana's determination to protect everyone's happiness causing her own Mirai crystal to form and summon a sword. She's about to use the sword to finish the monster off until she sees the human inside it and stops. As she explains, she doesn't need a sword, it turned into 3 wands which the girls used to defeat it. And as Hana apologizes to Hugtto, she calls her Mama. So, what did I like about this episode? Well, first of all, the way that Hana's despair and sort of character arc thing was handled. The biggest concern I had with this episode was that they were going to make Hana kind of get over all her issues with this kind of like self-esteem and sort of inferiority complex by basically just having her friends remind her that actually she's really cool. Which, is something that is still realistically possible. It can totally make sense, but at the same time, it feels almost a little bit too easy and convenient. And that was certainly a part of it, but it wasn't just like Hana just had to sit down while her friends reminded her how awesome she was, and then suddenly all the issues were resolved. I mean, it was actually kind of slower and subtle. They spent a large majority of the episode kind of talking about it. In fact, it was kind of the entire episode was talking about it. I think the thing I enjoyed the most was the fact that the character who seemed to contribute the most towards Hana feeling better was actually her mother. And that is a situation that honestly makes a lot of sense even in a real life scenario. When you were a kid and you were generally feeling down, most likely what would you do? You would go to your parents, and your parents would be the ones to help you and make you feel better. Because after all, your parents are more experienced than you, they kind of know more than you, they've probably gone through situations like this before and have also managed to deal with it. Whereas your best friends can't necessarily do that. And once again, kind of like last episode, but honestly even better in my opinion, the situations were handled really realistically. Sort of the dialogue and the actions of all the characters. When Hana is talking to her mother, and she's explaining that for them, seeing Hana's smile is basically enough because that on its own kind of gives them happiness. That is a conversation I can totally imagine actually happening between a real life mother and a real life daughter. It's not overly cheesy. I mean, it is kind of cheesy in a way, but I can also imagine it happening in real life. And then you have the fact that Hana's friends, upon seeing her kind of so distraught, kind of come to her house first thing in the morning. They kind of confront her, with Saya rapidly listing all the things that she appreciates and loves about Hana, and then Homare just giving her a hug. They let Hana deal with this situation by kind of just acknowledging her feelings and letting her cry and hug it out. Not by having some big dramatic moment where she has to get self-esteem or else the world is going to blow up. And once again, that is a situation that does happen in real life. That is how real people deal with bad feelings like that, with negative feelings like that, by hugging and crying. And the fact that they let it happen to a fictional character in this very kind of grounded way, I think was really appreciated. And it's not even just part of the episode, and it's also kind of sort of related to the fight. In that as they face Charlotte as an Oshimaida, it's kind of like he's sort of reflecting Hana, in that he's also basically thinking that he's worthless because he kept failing to get the Mirai crystals from the Precure. The fact that when Hana has the sword and she's about to basically defeat the Oshimaida, but then she realizes that there's somebody real inside and kind of just sort of hugs it instead, it almost kind of feels symbolic. It's sort of like if Charlotte's emotions kind of represent all those issues that Hana is having, it's kind of like that sword sort of symbolizes the fact that she has the ability to kind of just make them all disappear, to make them just die, but instead she doesn't want to do that and she kind of just embraces it. Embraces everything, the good stuff and the bad stuff. And then her realization of this basically leads to the weapons appearing. So essentially the Precure get their weapons through character development, through the main character getting character development that is shown through a metaphor that's honestly quite subtle. If that was intentional, I honestly really appreciate it, and I think that is a really clever and fun idea. As for what I didn't like about this episode, well honestly there's nothing I can think of that isn't some kind of nitpick, so I guess I'll have to nitpick. This is essentially a Precure tradition, but unfortunately every time they don't subvert it, it still kind of feels like it has to be mentioned, and that's the fact that the Melody Sword, like the sword slash the weapon slash the things, the power-up upgrade that the Precure got this episode, there isn't really much of an indication as to what it is, where it came from, how it was triggered, and why exactly it's more powerful. I'm not really expecting them to provide a kind of explanation as to what these things are and, why they can't summon them until the 11th episode, but It's actually kind of interesting, especially given that Kira just last year actually tried to have an explanation for these weapons, in that season they kind of made them themselves. But in this case, no, it's just like, it's a magical Precure sword, it shows up, I guess, and I guess it's got some kind of sentience because when Curiel says that she doesn't really want a sword, it turns into something different. And also conveniently splits into 3, even though, only one person seemed to actually summon the sword, and there's supposed to be 4 Precure, so it's one of those just very convenient coincidences that you just kind of have to accept, but it's still a little bit disappointing that everything in the writing of this episode was just really top-notch, except for that which just kind of fell back on the usual traditions of, it's magical girls, we don't need to explain anything. So as for next episode, well, after that really emotion-packed episode, I think it's probably time to have something a little bit more lighthearted. I mean, why else would the characters be having a slumber party? In all honesty, there's going to be character interactions and it could be entertaining, and not to mention, given that this is kind of almost like a shift in the status quo, things are probably going to be changing. The 6th Ranger arc is probably going to start pretty soon, so, it's not like we can really tune out. There's probably going to be important stuff here. We just don't really see any hints of it in the next episode preview, but I'm still looking forward to it. So that was Hugtto Precure episode 11. Yeah, no, I think without a doubt this is probably one of my favorite episodes of the entire season so far. It might even rank up there in one of my favorite episodes of Precure. I mean, maybe the fighting choreography wasn't, amazing, or the animation was particularly noteworthy, but the actual feelings and emotions and the writing in this episode were really, really top-notch. A character feeling inadequate and having sort of low self-esteem is something that isn't exactly new to Precure, but I don't think they've ever really made it this important and really focused on it this much before. I mean, it happens to the main character, and it's not resolved in 5 minutes. It's not resolved really in the action scene, and they use honestly very realistic ways to try and make Hana feel better, as opposed to just kind of having a magical test that proves that she's competent so she never has to feel bad ever again. I'm not going to beat around the bush here, and I'm going to admit that this episode made me cry in places, and Precure doesn't always do that, so I think this is going to always have a special place in my heart. I'm so glad they got their stuff together for this episode. Sayu and Homari's episodes weren't necessarily the strongest character-focused episodes ever, so I was worried they might kind of screw up the big first climax, but I think the first climax was even better than I was expecting, and that's really good. It's giving me really high hopes for when we get to the next few episodes, and the next character arcs, and the next big moments. So this is Gabby signing out, and I'll see you all next week. Bye guys!